After a great 2022 season in Happy Valley, I believe it's time to open up the conversation. Is James Franklin amongst the elite in terms of head coaches in the Big Ten? And does he sit atop the throne looking down on every single one of his counterparts in the Big Ten as the very best head coach in the conference? It's a great time to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Big Ten football content all offseason long. Always mash that like button to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses. I'm willing to admit there are maybe holes in his resume when you talk about elite coaches, maybe nationally and definitely at the top of the Big Ten. There are things that James Franklin hasn't quite accomplished yet. And of course, you need to have those big time accomplishments to call yourself the best head coach in a conference like the Big Ten. Let's take a look at what James Franklin has accomplished at Penn State, right? He started back in 2014 4 times. He's won 11 games at PSU. 3-1 in New Year's Six bowl games. I think this is one maybe big point where maybe he's a little bit better than maybe some of his counterparts. He's been able to win a lot of these New Year's Six bowl games, these bigger postseason games. And, of course, he's got that one Big Ten championship that the Nittany Lions were able to win in 2016. Now, when you talk about being the best in the Big Ten Conference, head coaches is in that category as well. A lot of times when you talk about the best, you're talking about Michigan, you're talking about Ohio State, you're talking about Penn State. When we're talking about head coaches at the top of the conference, you're talking about these 3 schools. Okay, let's talk about Jim Harbaugh. He started a year later. He started in 2015. At Michigan, 5 times he's won 10 games. 2 times he's won 11-plus games. That was a 12-win season in 2021, and, of course, the 13-1 season this past year in 2022. But here's where Jim Harbaugh trails James Franklin. Jim Harbaugh is 0-4 in New Year's Six bowl games. Jim Harbaugh, though, has the 2 Big Ten titles. The last guy I'm going to talk about when I talk about is James Franklin the best head coach in the Big Ten, is a guy that's standing on third and thinks he hit a triple. And that's Ryan Day. Because that's how I feel. This guy was set up for success. Okay, you're inheriting one of the very best programs. Now, of course, you can't pull a Mark Helfrich and you're inheriting a top program and it just goes do and it goes all the way down. Ryan Day has kept the status quo. I don't think he's elevated Ohio State. I believe Jim Harbaugh has done a great job in elevating Michigan. James Franklin has done a great job in elevating Penn State. I just don't know if Ryan Day has necessarily elevated Ohio State. Now, when you're talking about a program like Ohio State and you're talking a previous coach like Urban Meyer, it's hard to elevate that. And, of course, Ohio State, they're doing just fine these days. But when we're talking about elevation, these are qualities we look at in a head coach. You take over a program and you have it in a better spot than where you found it. I'm not sure if Ryan Day has gotten to that level. And it's kind of hard because in order to get better, you got to win national championships. But, hey, that's the situation that Ryan Day is in right now, right? 2 Big Ten titles for Ryan Day, 45-6 record. So I will say this. I think when we talk about James Franklin and his main competition to be the best head coach in the Big Ten, I think you got to look at Jim Harbaugh. And when you take a look at head coaches, and I think being a better head coach and being the best head coach in the conference, I think you got to look at 3 areas. I think you got to look at on-the-field results. You got to talk about developing, and you got to talk about recruiting. Okay, when we talk about recruiting, I think that's one area that James Franklin has a little bit of an edge on Jim Harbaugh, right? The past 2 years, Penn State has been higher in the recruiting rankings, has out-recruited Michigan. Now, of course, Jim Harbaugh may be flirting with the NFL, has something to do with that, but those are decisions that Jim Harbaugh has decided to make, whereas James Franklin, for the most part, has been pretty firm in his commitment to Penn State Nittany Lion football. Now, of course, Ohio State is recruiting better than both of them, right? I think Ryan Day maybe has the edge, but when I take a look at maybe not recruiting rankings, but the recruiter, I think James Franklin is maybe the very best in the Big Ten right now. I get it. I know Ryan Day has better rankings, but when you take a look at Ohio State, you take a look at their track record, I think a lot of guys can step in there and maybe do what he does. You can kind of get the vibe that maybe I'm not the biggest Ryan Day fan right now. I understand the success that he's had, but I just don't know in terms of his ability, in terms of his talents. where he's at. It's a little bit hard to gauge that. But when we talk about development, I think that award goes to Michigan. I think that award goes to Jim Harbaugh. I think the way he's been able to develop his team kind of over the years, I think has been really, really good, right? Like I said, maybe they're not recruiting the best. They're recruiting somewhere around 10th to 12th, 13th in the country most years on a national level. And he's been able to develop this team into a top 4, a playoff contender, a Big Ten champion type of thing. 2 years in a row that they've beaten the Ohio State Buckeyes. The development on this team, I believe, has been good and better for Michigan than it has at Penn State. Now, not saying it's bad at Penn State because it ain't bad. Right, you're developing guys like Saquon Barkley and Micah Parsons and Joey Porter Jr. You're developing really good talent into the league. I just don't think it's maybe at quite as high of a level. And maybe there's not as many. I think, like, when you look at the top of that list, you look at Saquon, you look at Micah Parsons. Those are two of the best guys in the NFL at those respective positions. But I think the quantity just isn't there like it is at a Michigan and Ohio State. When you take a look at the on-the-field results, Penn State hasn't been able to get it done, except for that really one time when they had a blocked field goal in that fantastic game against Ohio State, which led them to a Big Ten championship back in 2016. Penn State's had a problem getting past these two. Penn State has had a problem winning big games against Michigan and Ohio State. When you take a look at the on-the-field results, it's very difficult to look past the Wolverines and the Buckeyes, especially the Wolverines. And now when you kind of break down those three categories, what we're asking ourselves, is James Franklin the best head coach in the Big Ten? I believe the answer to that question is no. I do believe he's in the conversation. Okay, if these recruiting classes mean anything, and the talent, like you look at Allen, you look at Singleton, you look at Alar, you look at all this talent that he's bringing in, I think he's close. Okay, I think the bigger discussion right now is Franklin versus Day as the second best head coach in the Big Ten. But I firmly believe James Franklin is making his way. The one thing that he needs to do is he needs to win big games. They got Michigan at home in a likely whiteout this season. That's a big game. Ohio State on the road. That's a big game. Eventually, you're going to need to beat Michigan, and you're going to need to beat Ohio State to call yourself the best head coach in the Big Ten Conference. What do you guys think? Who do you think is the best head coach in the Big Ten? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Where do you see James Franklin? Do you think he can get up there as maybe the best head coach in the Big Ten in the next few years? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear them all. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.